from place. Okay, I got it. Do you want me to back up a little bit? Design labs. No, I won't.
Yeah.
I won't do all that.
Yeah, you can.
I'll keep going. So if you just jumped on very briefly, design labs are a very flexible container where people in landscapes can bring challenges and opportunities and have a structure of some kind. We're exploring what that might mean, but very generally support from the planetary network of bioregions in their exploration. And it could be very, very flexible. It might be a single conversation. We call a design lab. An example might be Elliot brought forth all these maps. Maybe we just want to bring together some people for an hour-and-a-half meeting to explore what the coherent narrative that ties all those maps together might be that really brings coherence to the bioregional scale. And then again, on the larger scale, these design labs may be ongoing. They may be something that takes a year. It might be 18 months where we're trying to raise $100 million for a particular landscape. So just to give some sense of how flexible these containers are. And we may break them up at some point in time into more specific kinds of design labs, but this is us just getting started. So we're also in the early phases of discovering the criteria. Like I mentioned, we want to have these design labs born out of landscapes, which is why the leadership should be in landscapes, which is why the last time we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, we weren't sure if we were even going to do a design lab until Anna and Preston stepped forward as leadership. We want to make it easy on them to start off. So we'll talk about purpose and what it is that we're doing, but I just wanted to keep that in mind. They did volunteer with a lot of work already on their plates. So I'm just looking out for my friends here. But anybody in a landscape can participate in these design labs. You don't have to be a member of the design school. Just one of the leaders of the design lab does have to be a part of the design school so that that communication, that relationship does take place and we can learn as much as we possibly can from whatever happens in these things. So next slide. So why would you want to lead one in your bioregion? Well, you can recruit design and implementation support from the wider design school, other bioregions. An example is, there might be a lot of mapping work that Brandon Lancaster, oh my gosh, Letzinger, sorry, Claire, you would have got my back on that one, but he is this amazing guy from Cascadia who started the Department of Bioregions. The Cascadia flag was made in his basement. He's been doing bioregionalism for like 20 plus years. He knows a ton about it. He's done mapping. Maybe there's some insight that he can bring to the mapping processes happening in the Great Lakes Basin. Also, if there's some need that arises around funding in this process of mapping the Great Lakes Basin, it will be much easier to seek funding from the design school fund if this is happening within a design lab. And then also you're giving back. This is a planetary effort to regenerate the Earth after all. The things that you're learning here, the scaffolding that you're building, the technologies that you're becoming more familiar with, all those lessons, all of that structure can come back to the wider design school membership, and it can be like the tide that raises all ships. And so a little bit about your mapping process. Anna led an ACT matrix exercise to reveal a bit of this. There's interest in making regenerative projects in the area more visible, bringing forward to the public what's going on, increasing that awareness. And Brian and Susan have very insightfully mentioned that mapping is a very important opportunity for us to share language, to deepen our shared language. That a lot of that will come about in the narratives that we use to weave together various maps. It'll come from a lot of different places, but the more we as a whole bioregion and a network of bioregions share the same story and holistic bioregional vision, the greater our coherence and capacity will be. So this is a huge opportunity to focus on that as well. And then specifically, there were individuals who had mapping aspirations. Elliot wanted to just get to know the bioregion better, which I think he did pretty successfully on his own with all those maps that he showed us last time. And then I think it was Julian who wants to use mapping to support the 2 billion trees project in Canada. Last time I mistakenly put 1. Peter Whitehouse wanted to visualize relationships. He wanted to do some social system mapping, some cognitive mapping. Brian and Susan mentioned that they would love to build understanding, public understanding of the bioregion, while also revealing the needs of organizations as the same process, so that they can create really valuable connections where the public can actually address needs in organizations. And then we wanted to look at all of this through the lens of these 3 pillars that Brian, Susan, and Penny have been exploring for how we might see and understand bioregional regeneration through the 3 pillars of bioregional learning centers, or bioregional learning in general. There doesn't have to be a center. Bioregional foundations, territorial foundations, landscape partnerships. There's several different names for that. And then weaving together a portfolio of projects. And so how can a mapping process intentionally result in continuous relationship building, weaving, storytelling, and funding that supports those 3 pillars? And then lastly, how can this be a living process? For those of you who've been in the webinars the last couple of weeks, John Reed from Boulder, Colorado had just a beautiful metaphor of the slime mold sort of making its way through a petri dish in a sort of mapping process where it's discovering the space, it's understanding what resources are available and how it can use those, and it's this actual living process where it's spreading out. And let's think of mapping in those terms, not in the Cartesian sense, not in the cartographer's sense, where we're separate from relationship, we're separate from the story in the present moment, but we are using maps to open up more possibilities and actually step into those in a sort of feedback loop. So what will the design lab look like? Well, we're partly the way through this because we have a leader. We have 2 leaders. That's the second bullet, but we still need to come up with a clear shared purpose. Why are we mapping? And we might find that there's several reasons why we're mapping. We might find that there's several areas that we're mapping in the greater Great Lakes cluster of bioregions. And that's totally fine. But I think it's gonna be really valuable for us to get as much clarity on that as possible. I don't know if it has to happen today, but for it to be a design lab, I think we need to have a pretty clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve and make sure that it actually goes somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and skip, for the sake of time, this part on who's leading the effort, because we've got that covered. Thanks to Anna and Preston, many thanks. And then how does the design school host and facilitate the process? That, like I kind of alluded to before, is something that we're going to be exploring. But one of the ways is we're going to be thinking about how we invite support from other design school members in bioregions. How do we invite the support, the very specific support that's needed, perhaps might be part of that inquiry, part of us designing this process. And then we're going to be exploring other criteria for that may inform design labs down the road. Through what we learn based on how all of this unfolds. So hopefully I didn't talk too long. I'm done. I do want to provide an opportunity for questions, comments, and then I'm going to go ahead and I guess right now I'll pass it back to Anna and Preston, but I'm happy to answer questions and comments.
Yeah. Maureen here. Can you tell me what school is doing this? Like, is there a university that you're working with? I hear you talking about the design school, but I don't know what university.
Yeah. It's not a university, actually. It is the Design School for Regenerating Earth, which was founded about 5 weeks ago now, and it is primarily based off of the work of Joe Brewer, and largely inspired by his book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth, which was a collection of, all of his work over the last 20 years. He's a polymath, he's a generalist. He has a very clear understanding of collapse and the opportunities for Earth regeneration. He brings a very compelling story, and he has inspired a group of people to come together who are situated in landscapes to explore the process, the learning process of creating landscape partnerships that are adapting and stepping into a bioregional vision as we all do this together as a network of landscape partnerships, as a network of bioregions all over the planet. And I see Preston or Claire, your hands. I also would love to invite Claire since she's so central to the design school process. Is there anything else you'd like to add when sharing the story of the design school, or was that sufficient for now, do you think? And Doreen, if you have any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer those too.
Sure, I think Preston has his hand up, but I think you've covered most of that. I think the big thing was to support work on the ground in an emergent way, so that we're actually co-creating the curriculum as we're going along.
It's a very living process.
I had a conversation with Brian Papa of the Legacy Project here, who in Toronto is doing a large part of the groundwork. They're an organization that's been around for 20 years. And so they've sort of tapped into the Joe Brewer presentation in the design school as an approach to bring a lot more energy and inspiration. And it's been a very effective strategy. But part of sort of the trick at this point is my conversation with Brian on Friday was that the whole mapping process and the concept of the ecoversity, which we speak about frequently, really, he doesn't see it forming as a specific institution in the Greater Toronto area. Rather, he's looking at a much more decentralized approach where we are going to be sort of looking through who is doing what at all the different institutions across the landscape, and sort of who combines the 7 different lenses that they use at the Legacy Project for their approach. Who's combining those aspects in work that they're doing at the university or at organizations or on the ground. And so it's much more, it's a much slower process of building those relations, getting those conversations going, bringing them in. And then hopefully we get a larger, broader community here of those that are focused on very specifically on the bioregional, the indigenous aspects, the larger perspective. So it's very much not based on the existing colonial institutions that are here at this moment. I'll pass off.
Yeah, thanks, Preston. And I hope that answered all your questions, Doreen. Yeah, great.
Thank you. Yeah, and I need to do some reading too, but I have a niece who is at West Virginia University who is mapping water for the purpose of flooding, preventing flooding, mitigating flooding. Would that be connected to this, the mapping project?
So I think that's kind of what we need to determine is what we want to get out of mapping. Like, there's a lot of different kinds of maps. We had discussed potentially doing cognitive mapping, landscape mapping, project mapping. So the purpose of this meeting is to start to clarify what exactly we want to get out of it. Elliot has shared quite a few of the maps that he's been working on our Mighty Networks group that I put the link in the chat for, so you guys are all able to access those resources. And I guess, so I kind of took it from Preston, but I wanted to send it back over to Preston because he also I don't know if you had more that you wanted to cover, Preston, because I know that you shared some of the things that you had written as well about connecting with indigenous cultures and indigenous native plant species. So I wasn't sure if you wanted to kind of go into that, and then we can open it up for a larger discussion, because really that's what we want to do for the remainder of this time, is clarify, hear from you guys. What do you think, what values do you think that this could provide, and kind of guide our way there. I also just real quick wanted to acknowledge Diane's message in the chat about decision making. I hope I didn't come off as too strict about the objective or objections. Yes, certainly if you have any realm of agreement, this is a very nuanced approach that we need to get to. So but yeah, Preston, if you want to share anything else.
Sure, I'll touch a little bit more. I think so we were so privileged that Elliot has such a passion and history with mapping, and so brings a great deal of enthusiasm and resources. to this journey. And I've had a couple conversations with him since those slides were there. And actually what it did for me was kind of reframe things a little bit, and it reminded me of what my journey was. So I think there's both the institutional aspect, I think, is easy to see and easy to find because institutions do maps for very specific purposes, whether it's bioregion, whether it's the rivers themselves, whether it's the climatic zones. All those types of things are very easy to track down. It's a vast amount of information, but the go-tos are pretty fast. What I'm also really curious about is aspect of relationality from a grassroots side of it. And I think it might actually touch a lot into the Indigenous aspect as well. Because even if you look at institutions, there's such a colonial framework to it that the Indigenousness through institutions isn't necessarily completely representative of the more deep historical involvements in that way. And so part of what I threw out there, I posted 2 different articles I had written previously to really getting into earth regenerators, was really about my journey with regards to economy and bioregion and ecology and how these things are related, because they've been so separated. If you go through, my background is anthropology. I have a master's in biological anthropology. And if you look at humanity on a lens of hundreds of thousands of years, we have been a species that was very bioregional, entirely bioregional. And it's only in the last few thousand years that this has drastically changed, and obviously very differently timeline-wise in different zones. But so my journey outside the Indigenous aspect was trying to decide what to do with my property here in Toronto. What do I plant? What do I do when you buy a house and everything's dead in the front yard? And what was my process of deciding what plants to plant, what flowers should be there? And so it was a very long journey. It's quite a long story I put out there, but what I was trying to bring it back to is we live in an economy that does not have any focus on the ecology. And if it does, it's just a very thin slice. What I was able to do through a process of 10 years is find the resources that are available in the area that allowed me to understand how to look at the land differently, how me find the knowledge of where to get plants, where to get pollinators, which organizations are doing these things, how to begin living that process. Because everything ends up being very abstract, and abstract in the end is wonderful, except that it's not how to apply it. And so there's an aspect of wiki knowledge, I think, that is really, really important, but it's also a very long journey. And this is sort of where I got a little bit confused, I think, in our last session between earth regenerators and the design school. Earth Regenerators has a lot of members, and there's a lot of people who have been doing a lot of things for many years. And so I did a quick search of mapping on the Earth Regenerators Mighty Network. A bunch of different people that have been doing this work within this collective popped up as being, contributors to this story. And so I think there's this aspect of needing to try to pull these resources. And I highlighted this to Elliot, and he immediately bounced back saying, we really do need to do a little bit of a summary and understanding what's out there so we can work with this a little bit better. So those are some of the perspectives I've been coming to it at. And then I guess the other big piece, when I was talking to Brian, and he's a little bit hesitant about this, he doesn't have the time right now to put towards it because he's in this process of building these relationships right now with the institution. So he's very much at that top-down level because of the history of that, the mandate of his organization, whereas we're here at the grassroots level looking up. And so his concern was the moment we start putting very specific parameters around the mapping process, we then eliminate other options. Now, I think there's also an opportunity, and I think Matt can probably speak to this, and there's probably a few other, or sorry, Elliot can speak to this, and maybe a few other people on the call. I do think there might be a potential now with the types of software out there and the types of sort of open software systems where we can find a lot more flexibility and sort of plan like, what do we do now. We got the inspiration and the excitement happening here, but how would we then adapt that and add to that, say 6 months from now, a year from now, so that things can continue to grow organically? Because what happens here in Toronto will also be, you know, happening in Cascadia and otherwise. And so I think an inherent flexibility is really going to be important in this process. So yeah, those are sort of the frameworks that I was coming to this at. And I thought we probably do need to hash this out a little bit amongst the group as to what those values are, what they want to see in it, and what would pull them relationally into this journey, what would make it valuable, rather than just, oh, it's done and now it's over there in the corner, look what we did, it's wonderful. What changes how we interact, what changes our narratives, what becomes a pitch to other people to bring them into this storyline, to turn it into something that draws that whole group of people together and gets excitement happening.
Thanks, Preston. I think you put it so well. And just, yes, the flexibility that we have right now. I mean, this is truly up to us, whatever calls to us. And I think, you know, the fact that we have 3 different, very distinct locations that are showing up here, that is also something that we can take into account too. If we're not able to come to an agreement as a full group, maybe what's most important for Cleveland is not what's most important for Toronto. So I think that that's also something that we could consider as we're going, as we're opening this discussion. So yeah, I definitely would love to hear from everyone what they're thinking. Benji?
So I want to preface this with the fact that I don't live in the bioregion, any of the 3 bioregions in question. I'm here to support, and I'm trying to figure out how to relate, what right relationship is for me coming here. So I want to be really careful not to flood the space with my opinions and dialogue. But I do want to say that I did spend a few months, about a year ago, collaborating with somebody named Joe Mon on social systems mapping. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the patterns of this really living mapping process, and how, and this is social system mapping, but I think it applies to all kinds of mapping. She was continually reinforcing the value in making small steps in terms of what it is that we're mapping, the new information that we're revealing that we had never seen before, and then advancing the conversation and seeing where it was able to take the new places the mapping exercise was able to take the conversation. And so I want to really appreciate what Preston was saying about recognizing what already exists and what came before, while saying both. And also, it's really important that we step into this as a living process and not get hung up in, in process. How can we continually be learning more and really honoring the present moment? And so that's all I want to say, and I'll step away. And if anybody feels like I'm talking too much, I've got thick skin.
Mitty, I think you were ahead.
You go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring in maybe just a couple of things. I was just on the plane, I was reading Peter Berg's The Biosphere and Bioregion. I can't remember the actual title, but just so inspired by his mapping workshops that he would do, where he got people to stand in the sort of, to get a big sheet of paper, put a big X in the middle of it, that's you, and then got people to think about the geographic, like the mountain ranges and the lowlands, and just kind of orient themselves as to where the weather came from, so there was that physical geological mapping. And I think yeah, we're in relationship to everything, and we should know about the, just the basic, how it holds together. So there's just that putting yourself into that relationship, and it really just was quite powerful. And I just thought it was a brilliant book. If anyone, and then the other was just sort of thoughts riffing off of what you actually just brought up, Benji. I was thinking something similar, is you need the people to work with that are in your bioregion. So there's the mapping of the, in different forms, we used to call it asset mapping, or it's basically how you find the others, sort of casting your net, who else is out there doing this, so that you even are cognizant of that, and that's that social systems mapping to some extent. There's also kind of the looking, and I think that's really important to sort of gather the people you need to be talking to. And then, but I think it goes back and forth, the landscape piece, sort of in getting to know that, because it fits into that. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of like you do a little bit of one, and then you know that you need a bit of the other. Yeah. And I just, what we did, Benji helped lead it with Paul Cheragino. The mapping workshops that we did there were just so helpful. I hadn't seen landscapes in that way. And once, you can't unsee once you've seen. And that's what it felt like for me, was starting to see the land as a whole system. And I think there's so much value in that. So, Mary.
Thanks, Claire. Well, riffing off both of you, like you and Benji, I'm not an inhabitant of the Great Lakes, so I sit here with a passionate interest in map making and the value of map making, but very aware that I'm here in service primarily to a bioregion and set of bioregions which isn't my own. So the kinds of questions that sit with me are really all come back to helping to understand the purpose of mapping for the peoples who are in the landscape. Benji mentioned Brandon Letziger. He is so clear about mapping and what mapping can do and what it can't do. And he's just left some indelible thoughts with me from just a relatively short time spent in his presence. One of them being that maps are not neutral. They are actually political documents. And if at any stage your mapping process is being undertaken with an idea of wanting to influence policy in your landscape, then what gets included and what doesn't get included becomes vitally important. I just think as educational processes, if what we're about is somehow trying to encourage in a very general but very specific way focus on bioregions, there's probably nothing more important than maps to help break down traditional ways of seeing the land that I live in, because those political territories, those nation state territories, that straight line crossing right through the middle of your territories in the Great Lakes, it's had a subconscious effect as well as a practical effect. And how do we break that down and have a different way of focusing and orienting? Maps are such a powerful tool. So what we include and what we leave out feel to me so vital. I think that's more than enough for me to have said. Like Benji, I really want people to tell me if I'm ever talking too much, because I'm here to learn and be in service to the group. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I think you all make such amazing points and set great context. I'm thinking to ensure that everybody gets an equal kind of say, especially within their bioregions. I'm creating breakout rooms based on the 3 main ones that we have. So I'm going to open them up and you can select which ones make the most sense for you to join. Welcome back, everyone.
Hello.
Great to see you on camera. I hope that you were able to participate and your internet was steady. Cool. Okay, wow. I would love to spend the last 15 minutes just kind of synthesizing some of the stuff that we discussed in each of our bioregions. I think for Rochester, we had a great conversation. Charles shared he works on the big map through the Eco Restoration Alliance with John Schull, which is a map of a lot of different conservation and ecological projects all over the world. So we were just looking at that and discussing how having a webinar in the future would be nice, just to show the use of that map and making it sure that everybody here is aware of the map, because I think that brings a lot of value. And I don't know if anybody else would like to from Rochester would like to share. And then also I'm thinking too, if we could think about next steps that we could take for future meetings, and kind of in your synthesis, what are some things that we could do to move us a little bit closer to the goal of actually getting to mapping.
Well, just to complete on on what we did, I'm going to put in the chat the big map that we've just been talking about, and I think we're going to get a date that we'll be able to see and navigate that. And we want people like Elliot, who is a master to be able to include that in his thinking, as he's helping us to figure out the right mapping for the design school. So do we have a date by which, Charlie, I think you're muted? Oh, no. Okay. So that's something to look forward to. That's something.
Yeah, and I think we'll work it between Charlie and John Schull and me, and we'll invite everybody here to watch it so they can see how the map works as well. Yeah. So
what I'm going to do is give you my version of the big map, because you were having some problems there with it. Let's see.
You
Okay,
mean
yeah.
put the link in the chat, Charlie?
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat.
Oh, great. Yeah, great. And I also just want to mention, I'm thinking that if everybody's open to it, we could also meet back in 2 weeks to continue this conversation. So this could be like a alternating with our Great Lakes Basin's bioregional call.
That works for me.
Great.
And then also if people have other ideas that come up, if there's some growing sense of purpose why you might map in your bioregion in the meantime, you could use the conversation, the chat below this event as well, and just see if that can stimulate some conversation and bring something ready to talk about in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Preston, would you want to, open up the discussion that you had in Toronto?
I'm going to open up the floor to this. So we began talking about different strategies that would get greater engagement with people, and thinking a little bit more about what bioregionalism means via maps within the community. And I'm not going to go into details because I do not have the expertise behind it. So I wouldn't mind if Elliot's in a position to sort of explain how he thought would be a good way of using maps to get a conversation going. and then perhaps Diane can follow him. She had a bit of an interactive game thing, or an article that she written or read about. It was some information about how to interact with people as well. So I'm going to leave off and see if Elliot will pick up the ball here. Thank you.
Yeah, more or less what I'm thinking is creating a narrative around groups of slides that are in that slide deck that I put together. So a grouping around watersheds and presenting that to various groups. I think especially working with children and giving them a sense of where they actually live could be very powerful. Also in terms of the feedback that we'd be getting back from them. Yeah, that's the basic idea, and I can definitely see that in some way we could incorporate that card methodology that Diane can speak more to.
Okay, so I'm just going to repaste into the chat for anyone that's interested, future reference. And this is a link to an article that describes in one section a card sort methodology. And I was thinking it could be a very interesting way for local groups to look for transferable aspects, whether any existed, of how that card sort methodology could be locally applied to start understanding the relationships between beings in local bioregions. And it was something that was just so compelling to me when I first encountered it in the kind of early to mid 2000s. And I think its publication date was 2006, if I'm not mistaken. I might be. But, you know, it's been around for a while, and it still is something that I'm always calling to mind as a really interesting way to help people explore how they view their types of interactions with the spaces in which they operate. And I think it would just be, I mean, I hesitate to tell anybody, go and read it, and your homework is to come back and report on your impressions. But, you know, it's just sort of, I think I will go and reread it and try to come up with some sort of sample list of what kind of cards I might imagine I personally could consider making sense for, you know, local eco districts in the GTA, for example. And it would be very interesting to see how those might look for Rochester and, you know, Buffalo or Cleveland and other bioregions within the group.
I love that idea. And I also wanted to just mention for the idea about creating almost like a presentation, especially to work with children. I volunteer with the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, which is one of the largest waterkeepers in the world, but waterkeepers are international. There's groups all over the world in different countries. And one of our biggest activities that we do is outreach and going, you know, I've gone to Girl Scout troop meetings and classrooms and meeting with kids, and it's so much fun talking to them about their watershed and getting them to think about the waterways that are close to them and just how different it is. I mean, half the time their parents don't even know what a watershed is. So I think that's just such a great idea, and focusing it on kids would be really cool and I think really impactful. Okay, so would Cleveland like to share what they were discussing? Did I miss anybody from Toronto? I think, no, okay. Yeah, if Cleveland would like to go next, that'd be great.
I just want to say from Cleveland that I love this idea of the card sort methodology, and I'm going to give it a go to see. What comes to my mind is, like, I live across from a little creek, And I try to encourage my neighborhood to consider the pesticides they apply go in there, but it's going on deaf ears. So I'll step away. Kimberly and Jen, you might have some good summary of our talk. You seem to have good on following of it, a good idea.
Do you want to go, Jen? Yeah, I'm just really happy because I just met really Jen and Doreen, and Doreen, you can see very active and local from like the inside out to wherever she goes. And Jen works in the Cleveland Metro Parks and watersheds, and I'm sure knows so much about water and things that are really important to know about right now. And she's aware of many, if not all, the different collaboratives already working in this area in our region, and is curious about, what is the geographical region that we're looking at? What are some of the things we're looking for? And that's where we are right now at the beginning of the process. So yeah, I'm excited about that. That was our talk. And if I missed anything, I probably did.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I think that's kind of the question that we want to continue to explore is, where do we want to focus? Because I think if we add in multiple bioregions and multiple areas, it will be a more complex process. So if we want to start out small, do we want to focus on just one area, develop a map around there, and then we could potentially do the same thing across different bioregions? We could do something different for each bioregion. I guess that would be something that we would have to kind of come to a consensus on, is where do we want to focus our efforts, and do we want to think of the type of map and then just apply it to one area and kind of practice it that way? And Charlie?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if any of you have any GIS experience.
Yeah, so Elliot does, Diane does. As you know, John Scholl does.
You know what type of software they use?
I'll let Elliot and Diane answer that.
I've used ArcMaps when I have access to it, and QGIS as well, which is open source.
Yeah,
Google
it. Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm similar. ArcGIS desktop, very, very slim experienced, more likely online, and most frequently in the zero cost department. I spend the most time on a public account with ArcMap, ArcGIS Online, and have limited experience with QGIS, but appreciate its free desktop capacity and have some kind of instructions to follow if I ever find myself in a space in which it's necessary. And to date, I haven't really gotten there, but it's very interesting technology all around.
It really is. Of course, it's been around for about 40 years now.
Yeah.
And it's people who don't know GIS, it's absolutely amazing how much you can do with it. The first thing when I studied my first course in GIS, the first thing I remember they said, GIS is about 5% about mapping. People think it's just, pretty maps. 5% about mapping and 95% about information and putting things together, planning, analyzing, all kinds of things you can do with it. So just to let people know that capability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that the free one, or is ArcGIS free?
GIS is not free. Esri will not give out anything for free. QGIS is free and very powerful.
And I am using a free public account on arcgis.com. It has limitations, and you have to know how to work the angles to get into. You have to go past all the, broadcasting about how to pay, and just keep saying nope and dig for the free one. And that's where I hang out.
Well, that's exactly where we are right now. And so far that ArcGIS Online satisfies everything we need. I do all my mapping in the map viewer. But it certainly is very limited compared to the full package.
Yes. Yeah, I have a access for certain purposes to the ArcGIS Online Pro. And yeah, then all the analytical chops come out and it's a different animal for sure.
Sure.
I do think we need to keep in mind that most people will not be paying for it. So if we can align on a free one, I think that would be better. But so
QGIS, it's not as pretty, but it's got desktop chops and it's open source.
I think we ought to have a session on that. Sorry, Benji.
Oh, no, it's fine. I hope, I hate to come across as interrupting. I've just got to jump off the call here in a second. I'm meeting somebody. They'll be arriving any moment. I'll get a knock at the door. I wanted to point out Kimberly's comment in the chat. I think it's spot on. She said that one thought is that it would make sense that no matter what wonderful project or part of the Great Lakes bioregion is selected for the design school, that we can all begin gathering data and information where we live. We would be doing it anyway, likely though perhaps more informally. And I think that what she pointed to here is that for every single bioregion, your initial process is kind of like a mapping process. You're seeing who's there, what's the conversation to be had, what are we interested in doing? And so I wanted to invite everybody to continue that conversation. And we can have, multiple design labs too. There's no quota. There's no limitation there. And so I just wanted to offer my services. If anybody wants to chat about this one-on-one, just reach out to me and I'll be back here in 2 weeks if you guys do another one of these things.
Thanks, Benji. Yeah, and Kim, I love that idea of the Excel spreadsheet. That's something that I can add a link to a Google Drive where everybody can have access to. I also, just before we continue, I want to acknowledge that it is past time. So if you have to run, do not feel like you need to stay on. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, can I just say it's been lovely chatting with everyone today, and I do have to step away. Thanks so much and see everybody next time.
Thank you so much, Diane.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, I've got to run too, but it was good meeting everybody. Hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Yes, definitely.
Next time.
The invitation. Victoria?
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued about the Excel spreadsheet and would love to have some people who are knowledgeable put that together so we know what information to start collecting. I have no idea how to design a spreadsheet for that process. Elliot, be interested in Elliot's thought about, is this an angle that you think is a good idea? Getting an Excel spreadsheet so groups can start looking for information.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's the information part in a geographic information system. Yeah.
And what I can do is I can just create a spreadsheet and it'll be editable to anybody. So if you have, I don't necessarily know what kind of information we'll collect, but it'll be something that, maybe we'll make a sheet for each bioregion and you can add to it, start a new column of stuff that you want to add. And yeah.
Well, I think the thing would be to have people like Elliot and, a small team design the spreadsheet to start. I have no idea what this is going to look like, but I would hate to have everybody's spreadsheet be like all over the map. It's one thing to experiment, but I think to the extent we can start comparing and, I don't know if I'm off base about that, but I'd love to have an expert put together the spreadsheet.
Depending how we want to display and compare the information, it could be very useful to have shared language.
Okay.
So that organization means that you input something with letters, and it's a descriptive thing. Whereas, I don't know, maybe a restoration site is, yeah, anyways, shared language.
Let me just finish that. I think, Anna, I would love for the next session to be designing that spreadsheet, with people who are knowledgeable and start getting an idea of it and having it online, having it shared, and start looking at what it would look like, contextually and specifically. I think it would be a great precursor to any actual maps. But that would be my thought. Yeah.
Well, and maybe like starting with the why and what is it that we're what is it that we want to collect, right? And then calling it whatever we call it in a shared language, but the why, right? And Victoria, you had mentioned having a 15th century map of Indigenous people where they live? Did you write that somewhere?
Not me. Good idea.
Oh, okay, I thought it was you. Okay. All right. And one more thing, Elliot, do you do things with data visualization at all? You can make these maps come alive. That's like one of the most amazing phenomena I think that exists.
Probably not, no. I might be able to figure it out, because that's basically how I figured everything out. Yeah, I don't know though. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you send me an example, then I could say yes or no, or I know how to figure out how to get to yes.
Great. Thank you. And
Kim, if you could put a link to something, wow, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I haven't, yeah. Well, it's like you just see a graphic and it's like alive, it's kind of animated, but it's in sharing data in ways, in language that people understand that aren't into numbers, which is why I really love them. But it all starts with those numbers and the data that's being collected, and it's same stuff. It's just how you share it.